Amazing, guys. Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, we had a great inaugural call a few weeks back to really set the agenda of what we need to accomplish in this group. And since then, last week, Tachi was there in Bitcoin Asia, Hong Kong, and we got to be up and center talking to some of the key folks who are helping to bring Bitcoin adoption on the treasury side globally. So that was really exciting. Got to talk to the folks at UTXO and, of course, Bitcoin Inc. and Bitcoin Media, like the likes of Bailey, Tyler. I also bumped into Adam Back over there and a few other key folks. More importantly, though, there were more than 20 different treasury CEOs from Europe, from Asia, from MENA, who wanted to get up to speed on how to activate their Bitcoin on chain, right? So everyone understands the thesis of how do you bring Bitcoin treasuries as a DAT, as a DAT, or as a listed treasury company. But the next step is what's missing for people, and that, okay, fine, we have so much Bitcoin on the balance sheets. What do we do with it next, right? So everyone was excited to know what we can do in terms of AI-enabled DeFi and AI-enabled yield for their native Bitcoin. And that's going to be the focus of this session today, right? We'll go into what was discussed in the last session, and then we'll actually use the working doc here, which I'm now sharing with all of you. It is in all of your calendar invites. This is the official open Google Doc that we use as the working doc. All of you should have access to it, so please open it up when you get the chance. And this will give a very in-depth, detailed breakdown of where we need to move forward as a group, what is already happening, and what's next. Right, so today's the second meeting, and what we're starting off with is the discussion that happened last time. So we talked about data ownership, and then post that call, I had a call with DAIAA of IQ protocol. What we wanted to see is, okay, for AI agents to be able to be self-sovereign and to be able to run their own microtransactions on BTC, they need to own their own data as well, right? Because without control of the data that they generate and consume, everything is dependent on off-chain mechanisms. And the whole point of Bitcoin is it's the best source of truth for long-term economic consensus. So how do we have self-custody in the hands of AI agents, but also self-custody of information assets and metadata? So this was a very interesting discussion we had, and what we will be doing with DAIAA and IQ protocol is he has mentioned exploring integrating that protocol with Tachi itself so that we have UTXO-based execution on Tachi with the cryptographically verifiable data containers of IQ. So this is one big update for the group, and this will be an approach that could really allow any AI agent on Bitcoin to first hold Satoshis, and second, to have their own self-owned data and metadata in these containers. And these will be fully cryptographically verifiable on-chain on BTC. So this is a massive new update for data ownership on BTC. By the way, Lou, this is also really exciting because we're merging multiple streams of DAIAA, right? So you have obviously the data ownership group, which is already started, and we're looking at how to bring in the innovations and the teams who are already working in the other areas onto BTC. And that's going to be a key driver for our group going forward.
That's great.
Yeah, so IQ was like the first mover. I would love to discuss with you which other founders you think would add a lot of value here as well.
Definitely. Well, yeah, let's follow up later this week.
Absolutely. So this is done. Having data containers for end-to-end cryptographically verifiable data on BTC through IQ on Tachi. That's number one. What we're looking at next is the overall problem statement, which is the driving force of this group. How do we actually enable AI on Bitcoin for two things? The first thing is the rails that we need to develop. And that's the key drive that Tachi is doing on chain. We need to have rails which are currently missing, right? So we only currently on BTC have either L1, which has an extremely limited Bitcoin script, or you have sidechain or L2 approaches, which are, again, taking Bitcoin, wrapping it, or pegging it, or bridging it, and then doing something with it off-chain somewhere else. We need to have native UTXO-based programmability so that AI agents can actually execute smart contracts and trigger-based microtransactions with sats. That's number one. Number two is verifiable compute, right? So again, we already kind of touched on that with what we're discussing with iCube, but this goes beyond that. Like, you want to have complete inference outputs verified on BTC. GPU clusters being able to be paid in BTC. APIs from all the top leading AI companies being able to be paid in Bitcoin. And that is a part of verifiable compute. And finally, you know how horrible the UI and UX is on BTC. It's absolutely nightmarish. The universal interface. Now, the beauty of having AI agents on chain is that they can do a lot of the hardwiring that we humans find difficult. Setting up and spinning wallets, triggering intents, and also doing MCP and API transactions. So last week while I was in Hong Kong, I spoke to a few Bitcoin DeFi projects, right? So on Bitcoin, you have a few DeFi pool and lending borrowing projects like Liquidium. In fact, Robin of Liquidium joined me in one of the earlier calls that Lou had set up for DeFi and Bitcoin. So we discussed that, hey, you have this lending borrowing protocol on BTC. How do you then have AI agents communicate so that they can automatically do lending and borrowing and trigger that? So we discussed how to have an MCP interface that will be running on Tachi to allow first the agent to own their Bitcoin and then directly call Liquidium's lending and borrowing wallets. That'll be something that we really look forward to as a fast go-to-market to show that, yes, actual sovereign AI agent-based DeFi is possible and doable on BTC itself, right? And that's where I need some help from the rest of the group, because we already have an agentic commerce subgroup in DAIAA. We have, on our end, been talking to a lot of folks who are looking at this opportunity that, hey, you have a set of pilots already for solving on-chain multi-agent systems. But how do we bring this to Bitcoin? Right? This is something that we need to work on together. And more importantly, the other parts that we haven't talked about is AI regulation, right? So in terms of the general subgroup discussion that was happening, I think this guy, Lakshay, who talked about, hey, regulators are going to be clamping down on sovereign AI at some point. And Bitcoin is the antithesis to lock down and control ecosystems. How do we have something that is available for TradFi connections and Web2 connections to use Satoshis while keeping compliance in mind? Right? This is something that hasn't been solved. And I think to solve this, we obviously need gating and DID for certain Bitcoin pools so that they can say that, yeah, this kind of Bitcoin flow is allowed to, let's say, pay the likes of Claude or Gemini, and this is not. So this is something really important for us to discuss. So I'll just pause here. If anyone has any points on agentic commerce and AI regulation, please do discuss.
I think there was legislation that was passed recently that delegates the issue of the sovereign data centers and sovereign AIs to the states, not to the federal level.
Oh, okay. I see. How do we then have like on-chain payments for these regulated AI companies then? Like, let's say we want to have Bitcoin paying Claude or ChatGPT. How do we have this done in a manner that is acceptable by these states and by regulators? Or is there something that could be a block here?
No, I think those are like two different parts. Having the agents kind of like communicate and have control over their wallets and do the payments is one thing. And then being confirmed to a certain or compliant with the regulatory framework is a different one. It's not going to be on the agent itself, but on the operator of the agent per se. In other words, you're not going to take the agent to jail, but you can put the operator into jail. So that's my thinking. So I think our strongest point in the discussion above is making the e-commerce easier by providing a built-in way for the AIs to have access to Bitcoin, transact on Bitcoin, and others.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Agreed on that. That's part of the Rails that we are looking at providing. And this will be open, permissionless. So again, like you said, it'll be up to the folks who are actually running those agents to be the liable parties. So that leaves any Rails or any tool providers to be away from this liability. I think that's an important point.
Can I just chime in on this Delhi here?
Hey, hi, Delhi. What's up?
Good, thanks. Sorry, I was a bit late. I was
No worries.
tied up. So I think on the compliance side, I mean, look, I think there's going to be a debate as to where liability lies with agents versus operators or creators, but as is the case with companies and individuals and applications today, I don't think it's really going to be dramatically different, and I don't think that there's going to be a lot of escape. Of course, you could have potentially fully autonomous agents that are completely self-sovereign, that don't report to anyone, like a DAO in a sense, without voters, effectively. And that's a kind of special case. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to get away from the compliance issue where it counts. And this has essentially been our fundamental approach with iCubes, that you have, permissionlessness, anonymity at the network level, identifiability at the agent application level, according to what the agent does. And you can argue to the cows come home in terms of what parts of the agents of the agent activity should be regulated versus which parts aren't. But the simple point from a protocol perspective is you need to have the flexibility to enable full compliance at the agent level or not, according to what the the task that the agent is actually performing. So I think that part, at least from my perspective, is pretty straightforward from us from a protocol perspective. And then again, you can enforce rules at the network level in terms of, from smart contracts, in terms of what levels of compliance need to be in place. Again, having this in a very open manner, I think allows you to calibrate it by jurisdiction, by industry, by sector, etc.
Wait,
So-
I don't quite get, what's the compliance problem? What is being blocked by compliance?
Well, it's just, I think fundamentally things like KYC, AML, when that's necessary, I think is the question in terms of, does the agent have to comply with KYC regs in terms, or AML particularly regs in terms of, that's usually what people are talking about. I mean, there's other factors, but primarily I think if you look at it from an AML perspective. So I think that's kind of straightforward enough in that sense. I think the issue around payment in terms of BTC specifically, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing that we keep talking about in terms of EVM versus BTC compatibility. It's kind of straightforward to do in an EVM world now, in a sense. And I don't know if you've been following this new ERC 8004 proposal that's come out. That's, well, ERP, it's about to become, they're aiming for it to become a standard by the end of the year, which basically is an extension of the A2A model and integrating a trustless layer to it and a wallet framework to it. So again, these things are being solved in real time. Every 2 weeks, every month, we make big strides forward. So I think I think as far as Bitcoin is concerned, it's the same conversation we've been having from the get-go. It's just a question of when do we have UTXO primitives that can work with accounts-based systems. It's that simple.
Correct. By the way, we have some updates on that later. We will show a quick demo screenshot. We're working internally on early stage demos for full agentic flows using SATs, as we've been discussing. Really excited to share that with you. Before we go that very quickly, some things that, we've been observing from different folks who keep asking us. In Hong Kong, this is what came up. In Bitcoin Asia, a lot of the treasury CEOs, even folks like David Bailey and the UDX crew, was worried about this, right? They were saying that, hey, right now, the entire positioning has been Ethereum as the base layer for AI agents. And they're really coming fast, like DAIAA you mentioned, right? New standards, new token standards, and of course, new bridging standards, right? And new intent standards, which are already being built out. How do we then leapfrog that from BTC's side? So I've been talking to our team about how to do a few key use cases extremely quickly so that we GTM and we're able to go to OGs, we're able to go to exchanges, and we're able to go to treasuries and say that, hey, these are some simple use cases that you directly use Satoshis for as an alternative. So we're not trying to do a complete bootstrapping of multiple years of development, which Ethereum has benefited from, and try to replicate it one for one.
So Parth, you keep talking about these fast go-to-markets. If people work with you, what is the speed at which they will able to do these go-to-markets?
Yeah, so we're targeting at the end of next quarter to go live with the first stage of our roadmap. To actually be live on mainnet with some AI agentic flows. We'll be sharing this in this call and in upcoming calls. Yeah.
If I may, I just want to quickly reflect on DAIAA Tanda's remarks on ERC 8004. It's a pretty good parallel to draw with some of the threads that we have been discussing in this group. It's funny that they have a similar glossary for agent to agent, the A2A, which we coined back at Bitcoin Vegas, me and Parth and a bunch of us, a few Bitcoin core devs and OGs. We were discussing this back in Vegas, and it's pretty funny that it actually caught on, and good to see an EIP as recently as August in Ethereum. So that's a good validation. We're definitely on the right track here in terms of registry and reputation of the bots, and making sure we have a more verifiable inference for the bots to make sure that there's some degree of accountability. Coming back to the regulation point that was also discussed in this call right now, it's a pretty good thing that there's a validation, cross-chain validation at this point in time with where things are and how interesting people find them in other chains as well. I just dropped the link to the IP for people who are wondering what's A2A all about and how Ethereum looks at it. And our interpretation of A2A is definitely coming down the road in the presentation. So very interesting findings that we have made. Should be interesting.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that as well, this is a significant moment in the industry because basically Google, the genesis of Anthropic came out with MCP for API integrations, changed the whole industry, everyone adopted it immediately. Google then effectively responded with A2A, which was a protocol for agents talking to agents as opposed to simply integrating APIs. Then the Linux Foundation basically started their own initiative to do ACP as an open source version of it. Then Google donates A2A to Linux, to the Linux Foundation, right? So that's already a big step. Google moved their A2A protocol into the open source framework. And now Ethereum have now partnered with them, with Linux effectively, but again, it's all open source, but integrated that into it. So, this is this convergence that's coming along. And I don't even know that it's really about competing with Ethereum. It's more about augmenting. I think the use case for why Bitcoin makes sense for AI stands on its own. The use case for why Ethereum makes sense for AI stands on its own as well. But you bring those together, and I think you really start to have this super powerhouse. And you know, when you've got the likes of Google making that kind of move into the open source community in a blatant way like that, it just shows you where everything is heading. So I think, you know, we should just take note from that.
Definitely. I really love the homework that you actually put into these threads. I really appreciate that. But as a Bitcoiner myself, I'm not too sure if I would agree with you on the complementing versus competition side. I still see that we are pressed to sort of fix this UX issue for not just AI or AI users, but also Bitcoin users in general. There's been way too many treasury DATCO plays recently, but I think what's really needed is for us to bring the original message back to people that, guys, it's just peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Go back to 2008 and restart it. Go back to the whiteboard.
Yeah, I hear you, and I understand your sentiments, and I can't argue with them at all in that sense, you know, for many reasons. But I guess, you know, the reality of the world that we live in now is it's multi-chain. It will continue to be multi-chain. You know, I think Bitcoin's role, I as far as I'm concerned, you know, I feel like all the other chains have insecurities. I think Bitcoin's only insecurity currently is this lack of programmability and this lack of AI integration effectively, right? So I think, you know, we plug that, then, you know, I think there is a role for the other chains, and there are ecosystems. I mean, ultimately, it really comes down to communities and tribes, right? So, you know, I think you can integrate, we can onboard a lot more people into the overall ecosystem. But
so wait, Delhi, I completely don't buy anything that you're saying, that there's a huge industry now around payments with like EVM chains, you know,
right.
Guys like Circle and Stripe making their own chains to do this. I can use those USD or BTC denominated, you know, wrapped coins to make payments. That's where all the market share is. There's almost no market share in BTC payments. I am interested in having Parth describe why he thinks the Satoshis are needed, because he did mention that. It's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, so again, like whenever you say something like that, is extremely backward looking. It's not forward looking, right? And that's the fallacy that a lot of us fall into, that, hey, this is the thing that's funded. This is the it thing now. This is where flows are currently. So this is the only way that things will go. No, I totally disagree with that framing. What we saw on the ground is like folks who are actually deploying billions of dollars like on BTC treasuries. Many of them either have mining operations or they're connected to public codes with multi-billion flows monthly of transactional settlement, often cross-border settlement. Every one of them has either experimented with Lightning or is using one of the custodial providers who do end-to-end batch settlement of BTC. They have been constrained, as you rightfully point out, by the fact that ecosystems don't exist for BTC, token asset standards, and even like RWA-based backing for cross-border settlements don't really exist on BTC. They will use stablecoin chains. That's the whole point. Like Circle, Tether, and a lot of them will be used. What is missing is that massive share of the market, which will not convert any one BTC of their treasuries into a WBTC. That means that they're already looking out for a solution to the limitations of Lightning for things like smart remittance, for things like agentic marketplaces, and more importantly, for things like cross-border settlement of trade flows. So these are things that they're already looking at. But the number one thing they're looking at is, which you've also seen, is that, hey, what is some decentralized finance-based mechanism that we can add to BTC as we do with it? So that's definitely there. The demand is there. Now, the solution so far has been Lightning and Lightning-based taproot assets, if you saw. There are multiple startups working on that. As we know, Lightning works for certain simple things like payment channels, but does not work for triggerable microtransactions, which is what people like us are building. Right?
So what are the use cases for triggerable microtransactions on Bitcoin as opposed to USD?
I think let us go through the rest of this. We'll hopefully answer some of this question.
Well, you've made a lot of assumptions, Parth, and you're using our time. You've said, for instance, that we need verifiable compute. You know, there's all these things that you've said there's a demand for, and I'm very interested in that because I've never seen the demand in any of these categories. So I'm actually interested. I'm
Oh,
just,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So again, like the reason why we went to Hong Kong was to talk to the people who actually have Bitcoin and they have Bitcoin that they want to use.
Hmm.
So they wanted to be used in DeFi, but they also wanted to use it in not only AI agentic flows for settlement or microtransactions, but also for anchoring compute, because many of them are miners who have also taken up massive positions in GPU farms. So they actually do have inference operations running alongside BTC mining. So that's already a use case they've asked about. So that's one part of verifiable compute. The other part is when we do a SAT-based transaction to pay a TradFi or a Web2 API provider, that would be another form of having the endpoint of, let's say, an MCP provider like Claude being paid in sats in the future. That would require some part of the integration for the MCP output to be anchored back into BTC. So that's where the other part is. But yeah, the first use case is what we've already talked about. And I think Pumpkin is also here in the call. So by the way, Pumpkin is our chief scientist, also a co-founding contributor. So he's going to take you guys through some of the use cases that have been asked for in the market. And this is what we're also building on in Tachi. So that might help to answer some of the questions.
Are we doing any presentation, or are we just gonna like walk through the walking draft here? Or what's the?
We'll just walk through this. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I think one of the really cool, interesting use cases from the early days of Lightning 2018 was that you could actually do micropayments. You could probably move subscriptions to mainnet Bitcoin, but it didn't really click as much as we intended it to be. And one of the main reasons are obviously the liquidity is sort of fragmented. You just don't know whether you would want to lock it up with a single vendor and then check it out at a particular period in time, which is not too flexible for you or the vendor. So the core issues are, number one, fragmented liquidity, of course, between two parties. Number two is, of course, the user experience in the whole micropayment system. We just sort of reimagined this scenario and we said, okay, if somebody wants to really watch a Netflix movie or any over-the-counter video service, and if they want to use that and peruse it in exchange for some sats and just pay sats for every few KBs or MBs of content that gets streamed downstream to the client. And if there's a way to sort of verify why my agent is essentially making those payments in exchange for the content, that would be a pretty amazing mass adoption driven thesis for micropayments. So I think the first use case that we explored was agentic micropayments in exchange for some of the mass use cases like content and media. And we just made this quick test on Bitcoin. This is RegTest. It's a local host node for people who are not aware. So here's a quick screenshot from the POC application where the agent is currently simulated, making the micropayments, and then the micropayments are going on Bitcoin. If you maybe scroll down a little bit further, you can actually zoom in and you can see the verify proof, which says valid at the bottom left. So essentially, this is a standard that we are sort of trying to build up and sort of share it with a few services and try to make a standard schema out of it and make sure that the same schema could be used by a few services. Maybe it's generic enough for content, but then it could also be generic enough for maybe content and SaaS platforms and a bunch of other services. So you actually set certain requirements with your agent, and as you consume those resources and there's an MCP implementation to sort of verify this on both sides and the payments are made without actually locking it up in a channel like Lightning. This might be a pretty interesting anchor case for mass adoption.
Pumpkin, I'd love to talk with you in more detail about that. We are actually working on a crypto media project that we have that's effectively trying to that's a top end application that could deploy this right away effectively. And we've done the whole sort of front end experience around it. We've developed a rich crypto media franchise, and this is exactly what we're trying to achieve with it. So I'd love to kind of catch up with you on that.
Absolutely. Would love to understand more about how we could work together towards standardizing the schema, which could be represented not only on Touchy, but then it could be recursively represented on Bitcoin mainnet. And this hopefully should make your vendors happy, and at the same time, or the creators in this case, as well as the users happy with their sats being spent in the right direction with a track for every few bytes of content.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and we've done a lot. I mean, this is what iCubes effectively try to be schemas effectively for types of primitives. So there are three that we're really focused on. One is structured data, so for identity, stuff like that. One is content, and this is the key use case for content in terms of micropayments for content services. And then agents, and for agents, A2A is really laying the foundation effectively. So, you know, and even a lot from there, like the agent cards and the primitives that exist in that really lend themselves to that. So, you know, I think we could definitely align on that and make a lot of progress very, very quickly.
Sounds good. Let's get cracking.
That's awesome, Gal. Yeah, let's set up a call for the later this week.
Perfect.
Awesome. Oh yeah, Pumpkin, you want to go into the use case 2 now? Yeah.
I think one of the second use cases that we really wanted to focus on was, so I've been trying a few agents of my own to sort of help me purchase a few commodities off of Amazon.com, but I have this issue, like I don't trust them with my card, and I would really appreciate if there's a way to hook in sats in exchange with some cryptographic primitives to prevent them from overspending and affecting my credit score. Things can get pretty real with real world use cases, if you know what I mean exactly. And we need to sort of have a backstop with the crypto. I think it's quite possible. But at the same time, I think there's also this trust issue with AI agents performing tasks that we delegate to them, but in exchange for that trust, there needs to be some sort of verifiability that the task which was specified has been fully committed, or a section or a portion of it has been committed, and needs to also come back with a few reasons as to why it was not fully committed. So if I may just give a real world example of mine, I was just wondering if I could get a headphones within $500 budget, but I'm not too sure if the agent really made the search as deep as I would personally. But at the same time, if I were to verify all of the agent's steps one by one, just because I'm paranoid or I'm curious if the agent really did the work at all, I might as well do it myself. So how do we sort of convert this trust deficit we have with agents who are supposed to get these delegated tasks from the users, but at the same time, you don't spend more time than the manual labor that you would do yourself, and try to zap it all into a single proof that just confirms that, hey, step one is done. You don't need to actually do it. You don't have to check it. You don't have to actually open the logs. So verifiable compute is a pretty amazing feature, again, targeted towards the mass users who really want to understand if pretty much every nitty-gritty features of a headphone was really compared. So that's where agentic commerce really has this aperture, which we think I think it's pretty interesting space. It's a pretty interesting white space for us to cover right now.
Oh, absolutely.
How would that actually work? Because I build these MCP tools, and I know that I've never seen anybody try to verify that the quality in real time. They go back through the traces in bulk, and they look for
Exactly.
recalls and everything else. So how would it, and you know, when they do the AI call, there is no verifiability. The AI just does what it does. So what would they be verifying in that headphone case?
I think in the case of these black box systems where you either don't have access to the actions made, or you do, but the logs are pretty hairy, right? In either of these cases, I think we need to have some sort of cryptographic proofs understanding the implementation and try to understand if certain actions were recorded on the log of the server, which actually performed the task. Now, that would be pretty much a hash matching system, which would help us realize if this was, as a matter of fact, recorded on the log. That would be a very high level first degree naive implementation of pattern matching. And we could go deeper down the road and try to identify some really interesting ways to make sure that it just doesn't really end at the logs, but at a cognitive level, this was actually done. Think of it as an observer to the agent's mind, if that makes sense.
It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, how would it observe? I understand
Through-
that you could incrementally add more checks and balances, I guess.
Through pretty much gripping the logs, but cryptographically, if I were to put it in a more implementation sense. So you would essentially run a regular expression, but a cryptographic version of it to respect the privacy, of course. And at the same time, you actually
All right, we should
verify
take this
that-
offline because I could write anything into my logs, right? This doesn't mean I
Exactly.
did
Exactly.
something right.
That's exactly why I called it naive. So that would be a first degree naive implementation, but then we should definitely explore this as a working group down the line, try to really understand what's a more stable implementation of this for verifiable compute.
Well,
By the
I don't
way-
want to, I mean, you're sort of getting a theme from me, right? Which is there's a lot of working groups around non-existent demand. Where's the demand, right? That's where we should put the working groups.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's
Definitely.
where let's get to use
This is
case
a-
3. That's been the
This is a
biggest.
pretty interesting demand for me. I mean, I
Yeah.
would say couple of years from now, if not a few months from here already, I might actually just search for, a best savings-based website from where I could
Right.
actually get the headphone instead of searching it specifically on Amazon.com. I think we're heading there. It's just not here. It's not too visible at this point in time, but I see that happening. And when that comes out, I do feel just the way we have source-based inference right now with LLMs, I'm just gonna say there's gonna be some equivalent of it, which is, proof-based LAM. I think that's where we're heading right now.
By the way, in terms of what demand we actually saw on the floor, is that everyone is asking, hey, how do we get a DAIAA-like thing for Bitcoin, right? These are institutional funds and treasuries. They're saying, yeah, we've seen what's happening on ETH, where you have actual agents being able to do balancing operations between different yield providers with on-chain proofs on ETH. Think of the same workflow in essence, but on BTC. And that kind of comes under the DEF AI category, which is the use case.
So
here.
that's a product that I build. I'm not sure that the DAIAA is a good approach. They only have 17 million under management.
Yeah, sure,
and-
sure.
And that's
That's where
because
DAIAA is.
it's
Yeah.
stupid to do that for sort of base yield. And it might be a lot better to do that for like DeFi yield stacking, where there's a lot more variation.
Oh
But,
yeah, actually, yes.
in my sort of reimagining of DAIAA for Bitcoin yield, there's a base yield product that doesn't thrash 1,000 wallets. And
yeah, yeah.
and all these other maybe more customizable DeFi placements. But
Right.
one way to look at that is it's a wallet problem.
Hmm. True. That's
That
one
you're
also
controlling a wallet and permissioning a wallet.
correct.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my question, which is where does the, if this thing gets to make payments, where does the private key live? What's the wallet? Because if this thing needs to know its private key, Plenty will come along and get that private key in a second.
Yes.
That's a really interesting question. I think it'd be too naive to say there's one standard here. I would say there could be a couple of them. I'd be happy to understand if you have any best practices in mind. If you were to imagine having an AI agent manage your sats for you. For now, I'm definitely thinking of maybe n of n or a threshold, with a verifiable secret sharing scheme. But these are just 2 to 3 schemes that I just can think of right now.
So what do you guys follow like lit? I use the lit wallet, which does that, decentralized, near chain signatures, ICP, chain keys.
I don't know these blockchains. Should
I've
we
been
study?
following ICP with their multi-sig chains. That's interesting, definitely.
Yeah. By the way, Pankaj, on that, we are also been creating our own hybrid signature scheme as well on BTC directly, which solves a lot of the issues of earlier ones. So you want to talk about maybe what we're working on there, because that's something truly unique to the space, and that will help sovereign AI agent take ownership of their own BTC as well.
I think that's going to be a very dense material for this call right now, but I'm just going to maybe provide a high-level coverage on that topic. So we have been, of course, exploring new ways to onboard sats directly from the mainnet without you losing control of your sats. So we proposed this to David Chaum and a few other OGs who are actively working on the post-quantum crypto changes. We are way too early on the thesis and the paper, but we have a basic POC to demonstrate that you don't actually have to peg or bridge your sats from the mainnet and still be able to spend it on any Bitcoin applications or even sometimes a cross-chain application through a hybrid crypto construction, which internally uses, of course, a threshold for the network side, but then for the user, it's a 2 of 2 multisig with one key belonging to the user, another one belonging to the network, which manages it for you. There might be a tad bit relevance of that with agents on Bitcoin, but we are still in the early days. I think after a few POCs, we should be able to, maybe in the next call, we might actually have something with Taurus implemented. I think it's a very dense topic for this just one call, just trying to focus on AI on Bitcoin, but just that's a very, very high level summary on the new cryptographic primitive that we have been developing for Bitcoin, post-quantum Bitcoin.
Absolutely. For post-quantum Bitcoin. That's really important. I think, Delhi, you mentioned this very important point at the first call. We are part of the Quantum Roundtable with David Chaum and a few others like Marathon and Hunter's Group for BIP 360. And Pumpkin here is actually helping those guys out as well. He's contributing there. We want to have post-quantum cryptography enabled for any app on AI and Bitcoin in the future, right? But that's a long, long journey. And of course, in the next call, I think Pumpkin will be able to share something more on Taurus.
Very exciting. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so to wrap up the call, of course, we have a similar use case which we just discussed about, deep AI. Starting simple, we've already talked to some key protocols like Liquidium and others of how to integrate not only liquidity provisioning, but also pool provisioning for lending and borrowing transactions on BTC L1 itself. And we've been able to do that as a test on our own RegNet. But again, more like a zoom out of what we saw in Hong Kong, right? From an institutional adoption perspective, these were the questions and these were the demand areas where they highlighted that, hey, we are all either Bitcoin treasury companies or Bitcoin miners, or Bitcoin OGs. And we all have a vested interest in making Bitcoin adoption happen. Now, how do we actually make the missing aspects of BTC institutionalized, and where do we see the opportunities coming in? So as a very high level, these were some of the things that were highlighted in Bitcoin Asia. Everyone, of course, said, hey, Bitcoin-based stablecoins, but actually backed by native BTC treasuries. That's one. And you see the new standard from Coinbase for programmatic payments. How do we enable that on BTC as an alternative to Lightning? That was the other big open gap in the market that was figured out. Agentic commerce, we already spoke about. You know that MasterCard has launched its API for that. We talked about Giza, and of course, like Andy said, there'll be much more sophisticated approaches to not only yield stacking, but also automated fund management, using native sats as the underlying collateral for all of this. So there are multiple things that key people in the industry are seeing, that we need to build this as a rail for native BTC to accomplish where we see these specific opportunities coming up. So that was a big validation for us, because sometimes it feels like you're building in a vacuum, but this came in at a very timely time. That they say, yeah, we're willing to really explore pilots on this. We're willing to go forward. And this is where I see 2026 will be a very, very important year for us. Even if a small subset of these use cases go live on BTC next year, we'll be making a massive, massive change in how everyone sees BTC for settling AI-generated transactions. So again, really excited to hear about more use cases and more collaborations with other groups from DAIA. That was my open question at the start of the call. Please let us know, and please do join the TG topic, and let's get moving. That's it from my side.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, Lou. Thanks, everyone.
I think just to add to Jelly's point, I think here are the 2 points that I just made, right? Lack of programmability in comparison to Ethereum and Solana. I'm sure we can work around that. Community velocity is not so GTM friendly as in with other chains. And that's pretty much why we see Coinbase X402 here. We see Tether. We don't see one for Bitcoin, unfortunately. There's pretty much not a blip on the radar we might have missed, but if anybody on the working group thinks that as an industry standard, we might have missed something, should definitely add it from Bitcoin's point of view. If not, we should be the blip. So let's try to work on these two capability and velocity issues within Bitcoin and just try to bridge builders together through calls like these, and just try to understand what the users really want and try to build them for them and see where it goes from there.
Absolutely, bro. Let's get cooking. And Jelly, let's have that call, bro.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
definitely. Let me. We'll catch up on Telegram and pick it up from
Yes. And Dr. Adele, we have a follow-up. Let's catch up tomorrow as well. Yeah. Really looking forward.
Sounds good.
Take care.